does the VA combine multiple ratings? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today I am going to show you how the VA calculates your final VA disability rating based off of multiple individual ratings. Actually, I'm going to show you how to avoid doing the math yourself by using the VA's calculator. Then I'm going to show you one way to understand how these calculations are being performed. Once we understand the mechanics of it, I'm going to show you an important implication for your own personal rating by showing you how my rating played out. But before we get started, I want to make a couple of important points about VA disability ratings. First, the Veterans Administration is unique among all federal agencies that provide support to disabled people. Most programs treat disability as an either-or condition. Either you are disabled and you get full benefits, or you are not disabled and you get nothing. The VA, of course, has a ranking system that puts veterans into one of 11 categories called 0% to 100%. Now, I say that these categories are called 0% to 100% because they're not really descriptive of the person, and in fact, they're not really descriptive of the benefits. This chart shows the 2024 monthly payments for a veteran with no dependents at each level of rating. And I want you to notice that the payments are not linear. A 90% disability is not 3 times as much as a 30% disability. My point here is please do not get hung up on the title of a compensation level. Congress sets 11 levels of compensation, and they could be named anything. Okay, now I could walk you through the whole process of how the VA does these calculations by the book, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, the VA website listed here has an excellent calculator for finding the combined ratings of multiple illnesses or injuries. Now, you guys know that I think I'm pretty clever, but trust me, I never do my own math without checking it against this calculator. In fact, throughout this video, every single number you see has been confirmed against this calculator. Even though I have worked out this math a couple of different ways, I always come back to this standard, and I recommend that you do the same thing. If you want to learn more about doing combinations by the book, this link has information about what's called the combined ratings table that gives you a table-based mathematical process. But anytime you have a mathematical process, there's usually a couple different ways that you can run the numbers and get the same results. And depending on the steps that you use to solve a math problem, you can get different insights as far as what's really going on. What do you mean, air quotes? So today, I'll show you a simple way to look at combining these ratings. This will give us the same results, and more importantly, this will help us understand the process more clearly. To get started, let's assume that this green box is you, the day you shipped to basic. You are 100% good to go. In fact, that's an assumption set by Congress in Title 38, Section 1111. It's called the presumption of sound condition. Okay, now let's assume that you get your first service-connected injury or illness at a rating of 20%. This one is pretty simple. The 20% becomes your total disability rating in red, and you are now 80% not disabled in green. I know, it's kind of strange, but this concept of the percentage of you which is not disabled, it's going to play into what comes next. And at least from a mathematical standpoint, there seems to be an assumption that this 20% disability randomly impacts your life. You'll see what I mean in the next couple slides. Now, let's assume that you get a second 20% rated injury or illness that we want to combine with that first 20%. That second rating is assumed to overlap with the portion of your life that is affected by the first rating in the green, not disabled portion of your life. So you can break this new 20% into two pieces. The piece that overlaps with the existing disability rating gets ignored because it's already accounted for. And the remaining part of the yellow circle is going to be 20% of the 80% not disabled portion. So that's 20% times 8% for 16%. That 16% gets added to the first disabled portion so that the total disability is now 36%, and the remaining green not disabled is 64%. All right, now let's combine a third 20% rating. Again, this new rating is going to overlap with the disabled portion of your life and the not disabled portion. It breaks into two parts, and we ignore the portion that has already been impacted by previous injuries. We apply the 20% to the 64% remaining not disabled portion to get a new disabled portion of 12.8%. Add that 12.8% to the previous 36%, and now we arrive at 48.8% disabled and 51.2 not. I'm not going to drag you through the math again, but if we attempted to combine yet another 20% rating, you can see how only about half of the new rating would land in the green area. The bottom line of this process is that each new individual rating has a diminishing effect on your overall rating. In fact, if we just kept adding 20% ratings in an effort to get a 100% final disability rating, this is what you would see. It would take us 13 individual ratings to reach a percentage that could be rounded up to 100%. Actually, let me show you something important about this rounding using this chart of 20% ratings. Suppose we only combine two ratings. From the VA calculator, you can see that the combined value is 36%, which rounds up to a 40% final rating. If we combine three 20% ratings, we get a combined value of 49%, and that rounds up to 50%. Four ratings of 20%, well, that works out to 59%, which rounds up to 60%. You see how this fourth 20% only increases the final result by 10%? A fifth 20% rating, well, that pushes us up to 70%. But now look how a sixth 20% rating, it increases our combined value, but not enough to round up to the next final rating. We stay at 70%. In fact, we would stay stuck at 80% for the 7th and 8th 20%. And we would be at 90% final rating for the 9th through the 13th rating. This whole issue of diminishing returns is even more dramatic if you try to reach 100% by combining 10% ratings. You can get off to a decent start, but it's hard to make it all the way to 100%. But so what? I mean, surely by this point you're wondering why I would take all this time and effort to hammer in this point about diminishing returns. Well, I see a lot of people chasing that golden ring of a 100% disability rating. But they do it by trying to tag on little 10% or 20% ratings. They already have an 80% rating, and they're trying to nickel and dime their way to 100%. And if we set aside the ethical or moral implications and just look at the math, it's not going to work. Remember, I'm a bureaucrat. I figure out how systems work, and I make them work to my advantage. And I'm telling you, the math makes it really hard to get to 100% with some extra little ratings. I mean, take my ratings. I have a 40%, two 30%, a couple of 20%, and some 10s, and I get up to a final rating of 90%, just like this chart shows. I hit a final rating of 90% with my first 7 ratings. Those last 3, they aren't really doing anything. And granted, I am close to the 95% combined rating that I would need to round up to 100% final. But it is further than it looks. I would need a new 40% rating or 4 new 10% ratings, and that's more than I can realistically squeeze out of my medical records. So what's the point? Well, I would say this. Don't wear yourself out chasing a handful of tiny complaints that are not going to add up to anything. Instead, make sure that your major illnesses and injuries are fully documented. Oh, and I have another idea, but I need to do more research before I share it publicly. So in the meantime, watch this video about the federal definitions for the word disability so that you don't accidentally encourage civilians to discriminate against you based off of your military experiences.